Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar comparing 17025 with ANSI Z540-1 and Z540.3. I am your facilitator, David Feist. Our presenter today is Randy Long. He's excited to be presenting this subject. He is an expert in this. A few logistics as we go through. All attendees of this webinar are muted. We do that so that there's not interference in the background. We will answer your questions at the end of the presentation, and we ask that you submit your questions via the Q&A box, and we will make sure that Randy addresses those. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Randy. Randy was enlisted in the U.S. Navy beginning in 1983. He went through the Navy's Advanced Electrical and Electronic Measurement School and graduated at the top of his class. He had a one-man laboratory in New Zealand where he earned 3 consecutive Outstanding Activity Awards. Randy is one of our accreditation managers at the ANSI National Accreditation Board, otherwise known as ANAB. His responsibilities are calibration laboratories and EMC testing laboratories and inspection bodies. He's undergone extensive 17011 training and has taken on responsibilities for APAC and IAAC peer evaluations of other accreditation bodies. Randy also participates in several standards development organizations, including NCSL, ASME, ASTM, etc. He is a well-rounded, well-versed expert in this field. So please, along with me, welcome Randy Long. Randy, I'm handing the presentation duties to you.
Thank you, David, and good afternoon, everyone, or whatever time of day is where you're at. I'm going to go ahead and stop my video so we don't have too much of a bandwidth issue. Okay, a little bit of history. In 1994, MIL Standard 45662A was rescinded and ANSI NCSL Z540-1 was issued. The reason for this is we had Guide 25 come along, and it didn't have a lot of the things that a lot of the calibration folks, who primarily from the military, were comfortable with. So many in the United States gravitated toward this new Guide 25, and seeing that perceived weakness, they developed the Z540-1, just to reconcile the two standards. In the late 1990s, popularity of laboratory accreditation to the Guide 25 in response to QS 9000 Revision 3, which is a document by the Big Three automotive folks, began new discussions on uncertainty of measurement, and confusion arose. So in 1999, ISO Guide 25 became ISO IEC 17025. Many laboratories drifted away from the MIL standard and focused on the Guide 25, where there is no specific criteria existing to determine process capability for desired measurements other than a customer's needs, which often weren't very well known. Industry trends toward downsizing and outsourcing moved calibration and commercial laboratories and purchasing responsibilities away from technical and engineering personnel, who we used to go to. This resulted in personnel requesting services who did not understand, and laboratories were, in many other cases, unable to reach a technical person necessary to provide the needed information. In other cases, laboratories were reporting all TURs are at least 4 to 1 unless otherwise noted. Yet TURs were not often calculated or retained as records. And I'll get into what a TUR here is shortly. Where laboratories did have TURs, they were not part of any decision rule to either qualify the measurement process prior to the measurement or effect a statement of compliance or conformity after said measurement or series of measurements. In 2005, ISO IEC 17025 was revised slightly, and the NCSL committee sought to revise Z540-1. This presented a problem, and they decided to write a whole new standard as a replacement so as not to affect current contracts related to military platforms. And you may be aware, military platforms usually have a long legacy. They're still flying B-52s. They've got ships that are very old. They've got other aircraft that are very old. So they couldn't change those requirements. Z541 was eventually withdrawn as a national standard. Z540.3 came along and introduced a new concept in the metrology world called the PFA, or probability of false acceptance. And this required, where practicable, that the risk of stating conformance to a failed item be limited to 2%. Where not practicable, the 4-to-1 decision rule was still permitted, as a typical risk approaches a 2% PFA goal that they had. Again, it's all about the risk with a decision on conformity. If you call it pass, is it really passing? In 2017, ISO IEC 17025 was revised again, and the SASL committee reviewed the standard against Z540.3. The group took the decision to withdraw Z540.3 as a national standard, as 17025 now expressly required a decision rule for a statement of conformity. The consensus position was that the language in 17025 was sufficient and that decision rules taken by laboratories would be accepted by customers. So that's where we are today. And again, it's all about risk with those decisions. In the meantime, NCSL has met to discuss a new Z540, but has taken a different path. They are currently participating in ISO 10012 working group, Technical Committee 176, Subcommittee 3, Working Group 27, if you like details, to address the organizational aspects of the Z540 standards. ISO 10012 is still currently in committee draft. We're hopeful that a draft international standard may be available later this year, or probably more likely Q1 in 2024. The industry has now fully embraced 17025-2017. When 2017 hit the market, the accreditation bodies, ILAC, decided that a 2-year transition was sufficient, and we have made that transition fully, with the exception of some DoD environmental laboratories that are still working under a quality system based on 2005, but those are very few. Laboratories and customers are still getting used to the myriad of decision rules that can be employed, and more being developed every day. Z540-1 and Z540.3 standards are still very much alive. Even though withdrawn, there are many military platforms which list them as requirements. You'll find many scopes of accreditation with multiple accreditation bodies with one or both standards supplementing their 17025 accreditation. So in practice, former versions of 17025 simply stated that when a statement of conformance is made, uncertainty shall be taken into account. Many labs have opted for what they call a simple acceptance decision rule, even though this did not meet the spirit of the standard. This was also called shared risk in the industry, and also an ILAC G8. So you can see here in the image, we have an acceptance interval and we have a tolerance level that are the same. If this is the nominal value here to the left, we have this gray band of where we would accept that result. The Z540-1 standard brought the 4-to-1 TER concept forward, with a simple acceptance permitted as long as the 25% uncertainty threshold could be met. This reduced the risk to the military to what was deemed an acceptable level. So now we have the same kind of picture. We have the reading of the device with the uncertainty bounded here. And this is approximately 25% of the entire tolerance. And this is the test uncertainty, not the measurements here. They're two different things. Measurement uncertainty includes contributions from the unit under test. A test uncertainty does not. Other common decision rules other than this 25% is 33%. You'll find that in mass calibrations, either through the ASTM or the NIST methods. You'll see a 3-to-1 uncertainty ratio. And there are a few folks out there that like that 10-to-1 ratio from the old gauge maker tolerance books, although that's not possible in many cases. So as long as the reading is within this tolerance limit, even though the uncertainty might go outside of that limit, this is still an acceptable result because the uncertainty has been dropped to a level sufficient for risk for the military. And this carries over from the old MIL standard, so it goes back a long time. The Z540 standard brought a PFA under 2% concept to industry. And this reduced the risk to a quantifiable value rather than just a percentage of the tolerance. The military services has large populations of instruments in which probabilities can reasonably be estimated. Military services and NASA in particular was a proponent of this 2% PFA concept. Commercial laboratories have either retained their 4-to-1 TUR approach or reduce acceptance limits to ensure false acceptance are reduced to 2%. The problem with estimating probabilities of 2% in a commercial calibration laboratory is they have very small populations. Estimating probability on equipment that they don't particularly own or know anything about is problematic because it's not a real good population. Many labs will employ what we call a guard band, which effectively reduces the acceptance limits. Now, in this image here, you see the tolerance limit, and then you see an acceptance limit that's been reduced by the amount of the uncertainty. This is called the guard band. So we've got the nominal value here to the left. We have the gray band where things are acceptable. And as long as the results are within that band there, you can make a statement of conformance. Within the guard band, some people will treat this as a conditional accept or an indeterminate. You may have heard that term. And then some laboratories or some customers will look at this conditional reject, thinking that perhaps the uncertainty brings it back down under the tolerance. And then above the tolerance level plus the guard band, that would be a strict rejection there. The conditional or indeterminate area, like you can see here, can either be one-sided or two-sided. Selling somebody on the conditional, though, can be problematic because a lot of folks don't understand it. A more typical approach is to guard band of the one-sided approach, as most customers would reject the idea of conditionally rejecting beyond the tolerance limit. So this is a simpler approach to where you don't consider anything beyond the tolerance limit, but you're still truncating that acceptance to an acceptance level below the tolerance level by a factor of the uncertainty. Some references for this were ANAB's guidance document 2700, guidance on reporting uncertainty of measurement for calibration laboratories. This document includes definitions from the Z540 standards and clarifies the 4-to-1 decision rule. Another good document with decision rules is ASME B89.7.3.1. That has several decision rules in there. You might take note that ASME in the B89 group, we default to the 4-to-1 uncertainty ratio, and we are departing for gauge blocks, but in all other standards so far, we're going to a 4-to-1 decision rule. And again, there's ILAC G8, which was updated in 2009, guidelines and decision rules and statements of conformity. This document discusses and illustrates several decision rules as well. Now, these references, there are actually many more decision rules that could be taken. Let's see, NASA has the 89% rule, which relies on end of period reliability. And again, this kind of approach takes a lot of data a lot of crunching math. Let's see, there's, I think I went through all my slides, David. Yes, I did.
Okay, Randy, that's been very interesting. There are several questions in the chat. It says that good afternoon. Many are confused about the dot or dash, dash one, dash two, and dot three. Was this simply ANSI changing their numbering protocol, or what's the reasoning behind this?
Yes, it's exactly right. They changed the numbering protocol from dots to dashes, or dashes to dots rather. Z540-1 was, as described, to fill the gap between MIL standard 45662A and Guide 25. Z540-2 was American adoption of the Guide to Uncertainty of Measurement, or the GUM, which is actually freely available as JCGM 100 from the BIPM. And then the Z540.3, you see the dot instead of the dash.
Okay, thank you, Randy. There's another comment here. I like to say that both Z540 standards produce statistically good comparisons that place the risk on the lab. 17025 simply provides data and uncertainties, and the risk is on the customer to decide if the comparison is suitable for them. That comes from Evan, who I'm assuming is Evan Dowdy.
Well, with the new 2017 version 17025, the decision rule has to be declared by the laboratory or in cooperation with the customer, and then the two parties have to agree on the decision rule. So the risk lies wherever the risk will lie, depending on what decision rule is taken by both parties.
Perfect. Another question. Why did 17025 not address uncertainty initially? You mentioned that in your presentation.
The standard initially did talk about uncertainty in measurement. It didn't necessarily require reporting the uncertainty. And it just vaguely said that uncertainty shall be taken into account when making a statement of conformance. Nobody really knew what that meant, although I believe the writers of the standard, even though it was an infant standard, figured there would be a decision rule. I'm not sure that language was well crafted at that point in time, but the requirement was there. It was just very, very loose.
Okay. There's another question that they wanted you to expand upon. What is the ISO 10012 that you mentioned is being worked on? Could you detail that a little further?
Well, give me a moment here. So ISO 10012 is the management system related to measurement. Its title is Requirements for Measurement Processes, Measuring Equipment. So it's a companion to, let's say, ISO 9001, specifically for measurement processes. And these can be processes in a laboratory, a testing laboratory, a manufacturing organization. Whoever has a measuring process and uses measuring equipment might adopt this standard in their quality management process.
Okay. Can you expand upon the 4-to-1 TUR ratio mentioned? You mentioned it several times, but I'm still not certain what it is.
So going back to the old MIL standard, I'll try to quote as best I can. It's like the process for the measurement, the uncertainty contributed by the measurement process, which is the equipment, the laboratory, the environment, shall be less than 25% of the tolerance of the unit under test. So you figure if someone's going to measure or calibrate, let's say a weight, the laboratory has a set of masses they use as reference standards. They have a mass comparator or a digital scale or something of that sort that they're going to perform that measurement with. You have the local acceleration due to gravity. You have temperature. You have maybe drafts in the room. The resolution of the mass comparator. Those are all things that the laboratory would bring to the measurement process. And perhaps even the reproducibility or repeatability of the technicians performing the work. The only thing the unit under test brings to that in the measurement uncertainty would be maybe its characteristics. Maybe it's got a slight bit of magnetism in that case. So the test uncertainty wouldn't include the mass contributor, but it would include all the others. It's probably better illustrated in a measurement device. So let's take the opposite approach, and let's say we're going to calibrate a balance. The laboratory has the environment. They have their reference masses. They have personnel skills, if you will. And that would create the test uncertainty. On the measurement uncertainty side, you would have the resolution of the balance that you're calibrating to estimate the measurement uncertainty, but that wouldn't be part of the test uncertainty. The test uncertainty, again, is what the laboratory brings to the table. And this gets a little more problematic if they're doing on-site work like they might for a scale or a balance. But in the laboratory, you got better control of the environment.
Perfect. Thank you for a complete answer. There's a question. Any suggestions for our laboratory as we are still using Z540-1?
Suggestions, if you're employing Z540-1, it would be important to develop your test uncertainties and have those as records, and then be able to compare that uncertainty, that test uncertainty, with any devices that come in the door, so that you can compare that specification to that in order to develop that actual test uncertainty ratio. Now, where test uncertainty ratio doesn't meet the 4-to-1, then it's time for a discussion with your customer as to how to approach that. And maybe you take a guard banding approach where you drop the tolerance by some levels to a smaller acceptance level in order to make a statement of conformance. Or you perform a calibration where you're not saying pass or fail, and then the risk is completely on the customer to evaluate the readings and the uncertainties.
It looks like we've got one last question here, Randy. It's how does the measurement community, since you're an expert in this, reconcile the continued use of what are officially obsoleted standards versus standards that are considered current?
The reconciliation is really not a concern Because if a customer wants something calibrated and they invoke Z540-1 in their requirements, the laboratory has to answer that somehow. The fact that these still live in military contracts, many folks decide to go ahead and go through those supplemental requirements so that their assessment includes the Z540-1 or both standards. And we have supplemental programs to deal with these because, in fact, they are still alive. They're withdrawn. They're not going to be revised, but they are still alive as requirements in contracts.
Okay, thank you very much. Randy, there's a question here for clarification, please. Do you understand that the TUR test uncertainty that the lab brings does not include measurement uncertainty, i.e. the 4-to-1 ratio does not include equipment uncertainty?
So again, a test uncertainty is the uncertainty of a test or a process. The item being tested or calibrated is separate because the measurement hasn't happened yet. A test uncertainty is estimated before a measurement occurs. It's the whole process, it's the procedure, it's the laboratory. I've seen many folks try to determine a ratio and they use the measurement uncertainty instead. And when you have an indicating device, everything falls apart. With artifacts like masses, gauge blocks, things like that, it works well because there is no resolution in the unit under test. Resolution being a major contributor in typical uncertainty budgets. I don't know if I answered the question or not.
I think so. I think so. There is a comment in the questions here from Evan. I think it was in response to your last statement that this is done to maintain historical data comparisons or trend data.
It can be used this way, yes.
Okay. All right. That looks like all the questions that we have. I want to thank the attendees for being here. I want to thank Randy for this. Oh, no, one more. Can you explain further the measurement uncertainty and test uncertainty?
Well, let's take a thermometer, for instance. If I'm going to calibrate a thermometer, I have a process which includes a reference thermometer, maybe a temperature bath. The temperature bath will have uniformity and stability. It'll have the reference probe itself will have a long-term uncertainty or drift over time that I'm going to add in. It's going to have resolution of my indicator. So let's say we have the reference standard, we have the bath that we're going to use to make the measurements, and we have the stability and uniformity of the bath itself. Those would occupy the side of the equation as the test uncertainty. So we do it like we would any typical uncertainty budget, root sum square of all those contributors. That would be the test uncertainty. As soon as I bring a new device in that I'm going to calibrate, let's say it has 0.1 degree resolution, so thermocouple base instrument, and I'm going to put it in this bath, the measurement uncertainty then becomes the test uncertainty along with the resolution of this new unit under test, and maybe its short-term repeatability characteristics.
Okay. All right. Randy, I believe that is the end of the questions. I want to say thank you to everyone present. Oh, I want to say thank you, Randy. Randy, do you have any closing comments that you'd like to give?
I'm available if anybody has further questions. The ANAB guidance document 2700 is a pretty good document to use as a reference, and it doesn't cost anything. I can be reached at, you can go on our website if you have questions directly for me. You can find my name and phone number and email address there. Thank you for all attending.
Thank you, Randy. Goodbye, everyone.